Captain's logs.
Han Solo. I'm captain of the Millennium Falcon.
This is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation starship Enterprise.
Priority 1 message from Starfleet coming in on secured channel.
You're listening to Captain's Logs and Lightsabers, part of the Geek News Now podcast network.
Hey, Captain's Logs and Lightsabers listeners. Got tats? Love your ink? But are you worried that your art will fade over time and the cost to keep it looking vibrant and fresh gets to be too much? Well, that's where Mad Rabbit comes in. After just one use, you'll see how Mad Rabbit is effective on old and new tattoos. All natural ingredients are used to keep this from feeling oily or greasy. Even better, use promo code CLLPOD and save a whopping 20% on every purchase. Keep your ink looking great and save money. Check it out, madrabbit.com, promo code CLLPOD. Hey, welcome to episode 32 of Captain's Logs and Lightsabers. My name is Jonathan. I'm one of the hosts of the program. We are the podcast on the Geek News Now network that talks about both Star Trek and Star Wars in the same show. I couldn't do this alone, so I'm going to introduce my co-host as he joins me for yet another episode. That's Chris. How's it going?
I'm doing great, Jonathan. How you doing?
Oh, hey, you know what? I'm having a great time. I am happy there. Yeah. I'm just happy to record another episode with you. It's been a little bit rough personal life-wise, and not something I want to go into too much detail on, but my personal life has been a little rough the past couple weeks, so I'm happy to have this to distract me. And we had so much fun the last time he was on the episode, and that was episode 31, where we talked about Strange New Worlds Season 2. I had to ask him back for another episode. He's actually a great Star Trek fan, and I don't know if I was expecting to have such a good discussion the last time when he joined us, but he's back for another appearance, and that's John Mark Tolley. How's it going, man?
It's going great. Great to talk some Trek and to talk Benny Sisko.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir. And that's what we're going to talk about this episode. We're going to skip over How Did You Geek this week. We're not going to talk any news because there's really not much. But back on Star Trek Day, Geek News Now put up a post on its main Facebook page asking the fans, and we are fueled by the fans, asking the fans to weigh in on some of their favorite Star Trek captains. They put up a little graphic that had Picard, Kirk, Janeway, Captain Freeman from Lower Decks, Michael Burnham from Discovery, and Captain Archer. And a notable omission from that was Sisko. And you fans, you let us know that you were upset with that. There were hundreds and hundreds of comments asking where was Sisko on the graphic, and we wanted to make sure that as a Star Trek focused podcast that we responded to that love of Sisko. So that's what we're going to do this episode. Mark, Chris, and myself, we have come up with several episodes that we feel highlights why Sisko is an awesome Starfleet captain, and just some things about him, some of his personality traits, and some of the things that make him one of our favorite captains. And we hope that you'll enjoy this look at a very underrated Starfleet captain. So without too much further ado, we're going to get started. So what is it about, Chris, give me just a quick 2 or 3 minute thing why you love Captain Sisko.
I love Captain Sisko for many different reasons. First of all, I love the fact that he has this little bit of, I shouldn't say a little bit of trauma. He had quite a bit of trauma watching his wife basically die right in front of him during the Battle of Wolf 359. And we see how that was negatively impacting him when he became the commanding officer of Deep Space Nine. And it was interesting to see how negatively that impacted him to the point that he wanted to leave Starfleet altogether. But working through the trauma with who became the Prophets, he kind of learned how to work through the trauma and be able to become this great commanding officer of this station and to help bring the kind of, not necessarily unite the Bajorans, but kind of, sorry, I lost my train of thought. He was also pretty instrumental in helping the Bajorans kind of rebuilding from the occupation, and it helped him to grow as a leader. And he even said 5 years afterward, when they had to abandon Deep Space Nine, how much that planet and everybody on that station basically became family to him. You know, so watching him grow from this traumatized person to being able to draw strength from it and becoming this great leader and soldier is something I really liked about him.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there with, you know, and I had a feeling you were going to lead, you know, I was fairly certain that we weren't going to get through this episode without at least talking about, you know, his trauma. And I expected you to bring that up, but, you know, with me having, you know, recently re-entered the mental health field, I'm looking at, you know, the episodes that I watched for this episode, you know, for this recording, I'm looking at the episodes I watched and I'm seeing, you know, how all this trauma, you know, affects. I'm looking at it through a different lens than I used to.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Mark, anything to add to why you know, or anything to add to what Chris had to say, or if you want to go into why you think Sisko is a fantastic captain, you may go right ahead.
Oh, thank you. I love Sisko because I think more than any other captain, you get something for Sisko that we don't see with other captains. That is a family man. You know, Kirk was famously married to the Enterprise. You know, same thing kind of with Picard. With Sisko, we get a father. And I love that aspect of him, the father aspect. I love his relationship with Jake. I love the fact that he's so loving with Jake, that he's not afraid to say I love you, to show emotion. You know, I don't think that's something we really got with a lot with the other captains. We didn't get, not that the other captains didn't get emotional, but you know, Sisko wore his emotions on his sleeve. You know, there was no getting around what Sisko was feeling. You knew right away. You knew what Sisko was feeling. So I really like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's a baseball fan. I mean, how can you not like someone who's a baseball fan?
And I know that is right. You know, that's right up your alley, of course. That's a line drive down your infield, actually. Sorry, bad baseball pun. Yeah, I love how Sisko is not afraid to get his hands dirty either. Mm-hmm. You know, he's very much a boots on the ground, and I know you had mentioned this, you know, while we were talking pre-show, Mark. He's very much a soldier. He's a boots on the ground, not a person who's afraid to get his hands dirty and do whatever it takes to get the job done. I mean, he's not even above blackmail.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yes. Yeah, I think it's interesting because just with their personalities, I couldn't see anybody else during the Dominion War in the position that Sisko was other than Sisko. I could not see Picard basically running the Dominion War like Sisko did.
No way.
And nothing against Picard. Picard is a great captain, you know. I grew up with Next Gen. But that was just a completely different show and a completely different Starfleet than what we see in DS9. Mm-hmm. You know, and as controversial as this may be, I've said this before, and this might be, and I think one of the best things to happen for Star Trek was Gene Roddenberry's passing. As sad as it might be, as I think, because that allowed the show to go in a direction that I don't know if it could have gone with Roddenberry still there.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't think Roddenberry would have liked DS9.
No, I think you're right, because I mean, you know, the whole idea was always wagon train to the stars, right? That was the pitch essentially back in 64, 65 when he was pitching the show, was wagon train in space. And yeah, the whole idea of being on a space station and not out exploring the stars definitely went against Gene's vision.
Well, not just that, but the fact that DS9 from the very beginning was a much darker show.
Yes.
And but it still had elements of Star Trek. It still had that hopeful future and stuff like that, but it was more grounded in reality.
Yeah. That's
and
actually
it's interesting because I've heard some people say how, the original series was pitched as Wagon Train to the Stars. Well, DS9 was basically Bonanza in the Stars, or The Rifleman.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's why I heard it described as DS9 was the Rifleman in space.
Yes.
I don't think I've ever heard it described that way, but it absolutely makes perfect sense.
Yeah, he's actually right about that. In The Rifleman, there was a single father with his son who was probably about Jake's age, and they came to this town on this frontier town on the edge of civilization, basically bringing law and order to that area. So it sounds exactly like Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yep. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if in the pitch meeting that's where they started, right?
Yeah, that's actually they did.
Yeah. I like it. I'm not familiar with The Rifleman, obviously, so I appreciate you two having that knowledge and sharing that with me, because now I might have to actually go seek the show out if it's anywhere.
It's on MeTV.
Yeah. Okay. It's on MeTV, which I don't have because I don't have cable.
I'm sure you can find it somewhere. It's
yeah.
Sure. An old Western. It's good though.
Okay, I'll have to check it out. That sounds. I don't have a very deep relationship with Westerns myself, but I mean it's got me intrigued enough to at least check it out. So I can do that. I can promise that much. So, okay, why don't we pick a couple episodes that we, as fans of DS9 and fans of Sisko, think are are some prime examples of what makes Benjamin Sisko a great captain, a unique captain. However, our perspective on it is, however we interpreted that. Let's start with Chris. Why don't you pick an episode for us and tell us a little bit about the episode and then why you picked it and why you feel that's a good exploration of Sisko's character.
Okay. So the first one I'm going to discuss is from season 6, In the Pale Moonlight, which is a very popular episode among Star Trek fans. And basically, this was the episode where the Federation was really taking a beating in the Dominion War, and Sisko decides on his own to find a way to bring the Romulans into the war. So basically, he and Garak work together with some sort of criminal to create a holographic representation of a Dominion meeting where apparently they were planning the invasion of Romulus. And so they complete the rod and the program rod. They have a Romulan senator named Vreenak that comes to the station who inspects it, and he finds out it's a fake. And what we find out is it's a fake. It's that new con expression. So we find out that Senator Vreenak's shuttle is destroyed after it leaves Deep Space Nine. It turns out Garak blew up the ship because he knew that that the person who created the hologram wasn't going to be up to par with doing the job correctly. And so by the ship being destroyed, it looked like any kind of distortion in the program was a result of the explosion. So it brought the Romulans into the war. But it's such a fascinating episode because just imagine what kind of psyche that you have to have at that moment. You're watching people that you know dying in this horrible war, and then you decide yourself, the only way we can try to possibly win this is by tricking people into coming into the war, and then the question is, can he actually live with that? And that's actually what he was saying in the very end of the episode. I can live with it. It was almost as though he was trying to convince the audience, but he was also trying to convince himself of whether or not he could actually live with this. And then he just deleted the whole program and the episode ended. It was just fascinating.
Yeah. I honestly, when I heard that you were doing that episode, I'm like, oh, come on. I want to do that one.
Well, so did Jonathan. Jonathan wanted to do it too.
Everybody, because that is one of the quintessential DS9 episodes. I mean,
right.
It's a great episode. And yeah, it just shows you how different Sisko was from the other captains, because Picard wouldn't even entertain the idea of doing that.
Yeah. Picard often took the moral high ground, and he did not he tried to find the cleanest solution possible.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what made Deep Space Nine so different from a lot of the other Star Trek that had come before at that time. No one ever really had that moral question come into play during their time on the Enterprise. All of a sudden now we got this big war going on, and what do we do to save lives? And now the question is, I wish they would have followed up with this to some degree, since the show was somewhat serialized, because it would have been interesting to see how that really did play with this psyche. Because think about it. Every Romulan soldier who died in that war, their blood is on Sisko's hands. Same with any Riemann cannon fodder that they talked about in Star Trek Nemesis. All those lives are on Sisko's hands because of this lie. It would have been interesting to see how that would have played with him a little bit more, but they dropped it. That would have been really cool.
Yeah.
I just think his end, his ascension to be with the prophets, I think that was just meant to be the final, that was meant to be his end, right? That was the end of his story, and any fallout was inconsequential, maybe?
Mm-hmm. Possibly, yeah.
I don't know. What do you think, Mark?
I agree. I mean, I can see both. Like, I would like to have seen at least something in the episode where it's brought up somehow. But I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I guess Star Trek has really never been that great at showing the fallout from the adventures that we see all the ships and Starfleet officers go on. We never really get the cleanup crew, I guess.
Well, we do. We have lower decks now.
Well, we have lower decks for that. Yeah,
pretty much. There was only one time in Star Trek where it kind of did get brought back up, when Archer, some of the decisions that Archer made during the Xindi arc of Enterprise's third season, and then when they came back home in the fourth season, they had that kind of hearing or whatever, I guess it was, court hearing, and Archer did get confronted on some of his behaviors, though not so much by Starfleet, but by Ambassador Saval. And so we got to see a little bit of some of how the ramifications of how that played on Archer's mental health.
Yeah.
True. Yeah.
But that was it.
I honestly forgot about that episode, and it's just been far too long since I've watched a ton of Enterprise. I just get distracted by everything else. It's so hard.
There's so much Star Trek to watch now. It's hard to go back and rewatch everything because there's nothing else to watch.
All right, Mark, do you have an episode that you'd like to kick us off with? Why?
I would like to start us off, or on mine, with actually a two-parter. It is the Homefront, and hold on, let me pull it up. Sorry. Homefront and Paradise Lost. These are two, because I think this really confronts, so a little background, in this one, Sisko has been recalled to Earth and is basically working as kind of not, I can't remember why exactly he was brought back to Earth, but there appears to be some sort of attack or something happens, and Earth basically goes into a martial law. And you see just how quickly Paradise can be lost. And, Sisko is put in a position where he almost the same, not really the same situation as in Inferno's Light, but a real moral conundrum. How much does freedom cost? What is the cost of freedom? And I love the scene where they're going through, and you see, so basically Starfleet soldiers on the ground, and he's at his dad's restaurant, and he's trying to convince his dad to get the blood test. It's one of those episodes that you look back on it, and you're just like, wow, they were pretty close with a lot of things that have happened in since that episode came out, as far as what is the cost of international security or intergalactic security, what is the cost of it? So that's why I really like it.
Yeah. And it kind of has some echoes, at least a little bit, to some of the plot points of Picard season 3. Where you have changelings infiltrating, Starfleet across the entire fleet, not just on Earth. Yeah, I actually kind of sort of forgot about this episode until you mentioned it.
Ask the question of are you willing to give up your freedoms for security?
Right.
Yes.
Like that's the big one. What are you willing to give up to be safe?
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of. Well, I mean, Star Trek has always been very good about, and sci-fi in general, just drawing parallels, using examples of things in the future to shine a light on what we're dealing with in our current, in the current zeitgeist, in the current, the way the world is functioning. And unfortunately, so many people are just completely not. They don't pick up on what these episodes are trying to teach us about ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it was pretty, for Star Trek, it was pretty disturbing watching those soldiers beaming into the streets. This was the first time that as Star Trek fans we really saw boots on the ground on Earth instead of on other planets.
Yeah. Earth has always been, in Star Trek, Earth has always been paradise.
Yes.
It's always been this perfect society. And I think even not just this episode, but a lot of episodes in DS9 really started to pull back that onion of that Earth, and I mean, this isn't, a Section 31, but Section 31 too kind of proved that Earth's not always necessarily this perfect utopia that we always, it's been portrayed as. It's held up by a house of cards, and the slightest little wind gust can cause that whole structure to collapse.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it definitely brings some heavy connotations and some heavy subject material to really consider how it relates to our current world. It's this is all, and like you said, Deep Space Nine has never really been afraid, from the beginning. It was never afraid to get its hands dirty. And I think, and same with Sisko, that's one thing I love a lot about the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I guess there was a really interesting thing you've never seen before as well. 2 Federation starships intentionally attacking each other. That was kind of creepy to see, that the Defiant's trying to head back to Earth and the Lakota's there trying to stop them, and Starfleet officers actually died in this skirmish. You had never seen that in Gene Roddenberry's Trek. No way.
Yeah, for sure. Mark, did you have anything else on this episode that you wanted to highlight?
Not right now. Obviously when we get to other shows, but not with that one right now. No.
Okay. Yeah. So you picked a fantastic, set of episodes, and it's now I think I'm going to have to add that to go back and rewatch. Anyway, so I know, we did a season 6 episode. We did a season 4 set of episodes. I'm going to take us back to the beginning for my first, and that's Emissary. Okay. That's the pilot episode of DS9, and we talk. This is where we learn everything about Sisko. We learn, that he is a family man. We learn that he's a single father, because of, the losing his wife during the battle of Wolf 359. We get so many aspects of Sisko's character in a 90-minute episode. I mean, we spend so much time with him. We spend at least a good 45 minutes of the 90 minutes just focusing on Sisko and his role and how, what we're going to see in this series. We find out what his importance is to the Bajoran religion and the faith. The fact that he is their, he ends the episode as their emissary, right? Yeah, we see the tension between Sisko and Picard. We find out that not everybody looks at Picard as a hero. This is the first time we really get to see a ton of fallout from, so front and center, in Star Trek. And then, of course, we get the whole reveal of the wormhole, that being where the prophets live. But, Sisko is able to explain humanity and linear time and get them to basically allow the wormhole to stay stable, which opens up the Gamma Quadrant. And of course, that sets up, so much of what will happen later on in the series. But it was a lot. There's a lot that happened in that episode.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah, it's just one of those episodes that just really shows us that DS9 is going to be a complete departure from the Trek that came before it, and I was hooked from the moment I watched it. So, and I still think it's one of the best openings to a TV show. So, okay. I've gone on a lot about how much I love Emissary. What do you guys think of the episode?
I enjoyed it. It's been a while since I've seen Emissary, to be honest, but
okay,
it was Star Trek has always had a iffy relationship when it comes to season, not finales, but pilot episodes, first episodes. I mean, as much as I love Next Generation, the pilot episode was not that great of an episode.
It's very rough.
Yeah, it is. But yeah, I mean, Emissary was for Star Trek was a pretty good pilot to start the series, and it really showed what the show is going to be about. I felt, and from the jump, you understand that this is a different captain, this is a different show. Mm-hmm. I mean, right from the jump, you're getting into something that is not like you're not like it's not your daddy's Star Trek.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this episode really shows us as the audience that that Sisko is not someone who is afraid to show his humanity, to be human, to admit that he's not omnipotent, that he's not perfect, that he makes mistakes. He's a flawed individual who is, at the time we meet him at the start of DS9, he is dealing with a lot of trauma. He basically, was unable to save his wife from dying, and he rescued his son, but he was not expected to, to essentially be a single father, at such a young age, and that event changed the person he would become. Throughout, through the next few years until his Deep Space Nine assignment, and then, through the course of the series. I mean, his role as a father defined him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think it's also fascinating, too, that he didn't really realize the extent of his trauma. And it was the prophets who actually finally showed him that because Sisko even said at one point, why do you keep bringing me back to this moment? And they said, you exist here. And it finally got him to realize, okay, my whole life, everything I've shaped in my life now moving forward has been in this moment. What am I going to do now to kind of move forward so that I can be happy, I can be good for Jake, and I can be good for this new assignment that I have?
Yeah. You pretty much wrote exactly what I had in my notes on that. So yes. I'm glad that you called that out, because if you hadn't, I probably would have. But yes, just forcing him to face his trauma head on was, it's interesting looking back at things, looking back at that episode now, knowing, that what he experienced is trauma. The first time I watched the series, I was in my 20s. I had no idea. But watching it again, you start to you start to see things a lot differently.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So, any other thoughts on Emissary?
I thought it was interesting that they actually brought the whole concept of essentially of religion into Star Trek for the first time. It was never really discussed in the original series or Next Gen, and they didn't really talk about any of Earth's religions. But I mean, they brought the Bajoran religion as this big focus. And it lasted all through the series. I mean, it got a slow start, and it really started to build more and more, I'd say around season 4. But they developed this whole different kind of religion, and Sisko kind of becoming the Messiah, basically. And then we find out it's almost a predestination paradox. If you watch Emissary, the prophets act like they have no clue who Sisko is. But we find out in the 7th season premiere that Sisko was actually, one of his parents was actually part prophet, which was a very interesting spin on the whole thing. So the prophets knew all along who he was, so they had to make sure he was created, so that way they can have him at that moment in Emissary where they could get his life back on track, so he can be the emissary in the future. Very, very interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been so long since I watched it. I forgot about that detail that he was, he has basically, was it his mother that was part prophet then?
Yes, her name was Sarah.
Okay.
And so a prophet shared her existence for a period of time so she can meet Joseph. And then as soon as Ben was born, the prophet left her and then the marriage ended.
Because she was a different person.
Exactly.
Than the one that Dad fell in love with. And yeah. I completely forgot about that one's existence. So you guys are teaching me stuff that I forgot. Any final thoughts on Emissary?
I think it was one of the better pilot episodes overall out of all the series.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. It definitely resonated with me as the best. I mean, I can't really remember much of Voyager's pilot episode, and Enterprises was good, but it was a little...
Yeah,
it was a different type of pilot episode though itself.
Yes.
Yeah. Mark.
Yes.
Do you want to give us your second episode?
So I was thinking about this, and there's a couple ones, and this, because I think it shows how Sisko dealt with betrayal. And there is By Inferno's Light, where the Cardassians join the Dominion and kind of really kicks off the Dominion War. And then I think the one, though, that I really affected Sisko was the loss of For the Cause and For the Uniform, where we see the defection of Michael Eddington to the Maquis. And those, I think more than anything, you really see how hard Sisko takes betrayal. Just so hard. And I think even more than, because I don't think he trusted Dukat at all. But with Eddington, this is someone that, he had dinner with. He trusted implicitly. This was a Starfleet officer. And just, for him to, in his mind, betray the uniform like that just was such a hard thing for him. But I picked Inferno's Light because this was the episode that really kicked off the Dominion War. And I think this is really when Deep Space Nine for me really hit its stride. You really get into the meat of Deep Space Nine. You can kind of tell that this is what the writers were working towards. This is where they're heading toward. Everything has been leading up to this. And it's something we hadn't seen in Star Trek. Right.
And all of it was peppered in throughout. We still have our your classic Trek episodes and your classic storytelling setups, but you had all of those little bits peppered in, and then it just finally came to a head.
I'll never forget. I'm glad that those episodes aired before the internet was really big, because when they found out, we were watching the episode that night and we found out that Cardassia joined the Dominion. That was such a jaw-dropping moment that you weren't expecting,
Right? when Dukat's ship turns around, and I think it was Kira, said, you can't take them on by yourself, and he's like, oh, we're not going to attack them. We're there to join them. It was just that was such a. I think not to put this in, but I think doing an episode with you guys on Dukat as one of the best Star Trek villains.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, that would be fun, because he is one of my favorite Star Trek villains of all time. Almost even more so than Khan. It's close, but Dukat is just such a nuanced villain. And a perfect foil for Sisko.
Yeah.
Yes, because they are more alike than either of them wants to admit.
Yeah, exactly.
Really?
Exactly. That's a good all single fathers.
Yes.
Yeah, both.
Both would do anything for their family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's and that's one thing, Sisko knew who his enemies were basically the entire run of the series. They because they weren't out charting the stars, they knew what to expect, and it was a lot more. It felt more like a chess match, throughout the run of the series.
I think that, in going back to Eddington, I think that's why Eddington's betrayal was so hard for Sisko. Was he didn't know that Eddington was an enemy.
Yeah.
And that was something that was not like, it was like putting an extra piece on the chessboard. And suddenly Eddington probably didn't see himself as an enemy of Sisko. The whole Maquis thing to me was just fascinating. It's that whole, it's just in how so many people in Starfleet were just so put off by them.
Right. But it was between that and, with the Dominion War and the Maquis infiltrating Starfleet, this show and Trek of the 90s really started to show all of the cracks in the armor that was Starfleet. You see that as an organization, they hold themselves to such lofty ideals, but there are still people that don't feel like that, that Starfleet is the answer.
Yeah.
And it was also one of the first times that you've ever seen one of the captains actually become beyond obsessive about a situation. I mean, you saw Kirk in the episode Obsession, where that dichoronium creature, he was obsessed about killing that. You see Captain Janeway in Equinox Part 2 going after Captain Ransom because of him killing those creatures to get home quicker. Sisko was actually going to destroy every Maquis colony in the demilitarized zone, poison every single planet until he got Eddington, and that's finally what got Eddington to stop, and surrender was destroying threatening that,
it's so unusual, because I know as the audience you're always supposed to side with Starfleet, that's the whole idea, but with the Maquis, I find myself so many times siding with the Maquis. Like, they're just people who just want to be left alone. They just want their own, and they're put in such a unusual position and such a bad position. You got, no matter what they do, they're not going to be free.
Yeah. I think we could probably write dissertations on DS9, honestly,
I think we're creating good episode ideas for the future. They're just randomly coming out.
An episode on Dukat, and if we're going to do an episode on Dukat, we have to do one on Weyoun, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I love Weyoun.
Oh, right? I mean, Jeffrey Combs.
Yes. Yeah. He's been in pretty much everything Star Trek, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hasn't been on Discovery yet. He hasn't been on Strange New Worlds yet.
Or Picard.
Well, that's a lost opportunity. Anyway, we're not going to make up for, we're not going to make excuses for Paramount, but come on, give us some Jeffrey Combs at least once.
Absolutely.
All right. Mark, you had talked about Dukat and wanting to do an episode on him, and I am totally on board. That's actually I one of the episodes that I picked. My next one is a very fun, a very good episode of DS9, and it pretty much, it's kind of a bottle episode. It really only features Sisko and Dukat and a few other of the DS9 crew members. But that is, it's an episode from season 6. It's called Waltz. This, if you guys remember, this is the one where Dukat and Sisko are on board the USS Honshu, and they're en route to Dukat's trial for the war crimes against the Federation. The ship, the Honshu, is attacked and destroyed by some Cardassian fighters, and Dukat helps, he says, he helps Sisko escape the brig where he had just come to visit him, and they get on a shuttle and they're able to get to a planet where Dukat actually, helps put a splint on Sisko's arm where he had the plasma burns to kind of try to heal him. And it looks like he's taking care of Sisko, but we kind of find out that Dukat is really as bad as Sisko thought he was, even though they could relate, and even though they had, they were able to share some of their trauma, over losing family members, Dukat losing his daughter and Sisko, of course, losing his wife, Jennifer. Yeah, unfortunately, they are still essentially mirror images of one another, with Dukat being completely evil and Sisko still, Sisko is still good, but he just isn't afraid to get his hands dirty to get the job done. But that still is what separates those two from one another, is Dukat is essentially evil personified. And we find that out in that episode. What do you guys think of Waltz? Do you remember that episode?
Absolutely. I think it was interesting, obviously, the banter between Sisko and Dukat. I think what really interested me in the episode was not so much the Sisko piece, but Dukat basically saw himself as a savior of the Bajoran people during the occupation. Yeah. And in his mind, he was basically this messiah who tried to help them and through all their toils and troubles. And any time that Sisko would actually would go against that, he didn't want to hear it. It went against this fantasy that he had, and it just seemed to drive him apart more mad than what happened with Ziyal being killed. It was just fascinating to see how he thought of himself during the occupation when billions of people hate this guy. Yeah. So it was just really interesting. We had seen over the years little bits of that building up, but this is exactly where we finally saw that happen. I just thought it was fascinating for it to finally come out and see what Dukat really thought of his time there and how skewed it is compared to everybody else.
Yeah, and Dukat is clearly having a psychotic episode. When he sees the hallucinations of Weyoun, and he also sees, I think the one that really ultimately is the one that sets him off is he sees Kira Nerys, and she's constantly berating him, the hallucination form. And that's kind of, that's what actually pushes him over the edge, is because, he pulls out a phaser and tries to shoot the Kira hallucination, with his phaser. So yeah, it was another good representation of mental health. And I forgot again. I kind of forgot about that being such a heavy part of the episode until rewatching it for this. I promise you, the next one that I chose does not have as much mental health related stuff. So, well, actually, you know what? No, I take that back. Never mind. There's obviously a theme here subconsciously that I put together. So, before we get to my next episode. Chris, why don't you give us your third highlight episode and tell us why you picked that one?
All right. So the next one I picked was from the third season. It's called The Die Is Cast, which was actually the second part of a two-parter. The first episode was called Improbable Cause, and that's when Garrick's shop was blown up, and they tried to find out the particular reasons as to why. And we find out by the end of the episode that the Romulan Tal Shiar and the Obsidian Order of the Cardassians joined together with a fleet, and they were going to go into the wormhole and attack the Founder's homeworld. So, and then we go into the Die Is Cast, and obviously Sisko betrays orders. They're supposed to stay in the Alpha Quadrant to defend Bajor with the Defiant, but Sisko betrays orders, and the crew decide to follow him, and they go into the Gamma Quadrant. They manage to rescue Odo and Garrick, and the fleets were destroyed. There were 150 Jem'Hadar ships that came after the fleet and wiped them out. And the reason why I picked this as a really good Sisko episode is I'm very fascinated. I love the episodes where you get the characters, especially the commanding officers, where they feel as though their crew members, the people that are basically family to them, are worth more than the bigger picture. And we've seen a lot of that or maybe somewhat in Star Trek. I mean, you go back to Star Trek 3. I mean, Captain Kirk risked everything and even destroyed the Enterprise just to go back and get Spock from Genesis. And he even says in the episode or in the movie, Spock says, "You came back for me. Why did you do this?" And Kirk says, "Because the need of the one outweighed the needs of the many." And that's kind of what happened with Sisko. He was willing to break orders and risk his career and even risk the safety of Deep Space Nine and Bajor itself just to go back into the Alpha or the Gamma Quadrant to go and get his officer. You know, I just think that's very admirable of a quality of a commanding officer. And I know it wasn't the biggest theme of the episode, but that's just something that stuck out for me with Sisko.
Yeah. I mean, he cared about his crew. He cared about the people under his command. I mean, you could make a case that every Starfleet captain does, but some definitely show it more than others. Yeah, and that's, I mean, I kind of left the assignment open for you guys picking episodes, of course. So, yeah, whatever makes a good case for you believing that Sisko is a good captain, it was fair game. So, yeah, I'm not as familiar with this episode either, and like I said, you know, it's you had a reason for picking it. You brought up a very interesting character trait that most Starfleet captains share, but some, again, take it more seriously than others. So, so thank you for picking that episode. Mark, I know you've probably been saving this one for last.
Well, yeah.
Intentionally, I'm certain.
Yeah. My third one is Take Me Out to the Holosuite. It's the baseball episode. I like it. I think this is such a good episode. For one, it's just a fun episode. And in a series that is such a serious Star Trek series, and so, you know, a lot of ways, you know, the more darker, at the time at least, the most dark Star Trek series we've had. It was always good when they had these kind of fun episodes like this. Like, I think of this one, I think of Little Green Men, that are just kind of fun episodes. And, you know, a big part of Sisko's upbringing and personality that we get from the very beginning, that kind of is part of who he is his love of baseball. You know, he always has that baseball on the desk, on his desk. And there's a Vulcan captain that comes to visit, and you find out that they've always been kind of rivals. And one thing leads to another, and they go, you know, they have a baseball game. And you kind of see, you know, the Niners, as they're called, as the Deep Space Nine team is called, versus what was the name of the Vulcan team? It was the...
Is it the Logistics?
Logicians. Something like that. Logicians, yeah. But just the fact that, you know, what he loves about baseball is the unpredictability of it. That every time a pitcher throws a pitch, there are a innumerable amount of things that could happen.
Exactly.
And, you know, that's one thing I love. One thing I love about baseball is, you know, it's so much thinking goes into it, you know, as a player, you know, if you're a player, if you're a coach, if you're just watching it, you know, depending on what the situation is, you have a man on second with no outs, you know. Do you bunt in this situation? Do you go for a hit? Do you if you're defense, how do you play it? Do you try for a double play? What type of pitch do you pitch if you're the pitcher? All different types of things. And, you know, we finally see this. I think this is the episode where we really see the crew, the Deep Space Nine crew, all of them kind of come together as a family. You know, we finally kind of see everyone kind of be like, all right, you know, we've seen it, you know, bits and pieces here and there, but this is the one where even Quark is in on. You kind of see him coming in, and Rom and Nog and all of these other, you know, different people kind of come together and kind of join this, become a family and become a team.
Yeah. It unified the whole crew. I mean, you know, you essentially had Quark coming in with the Ferengi interests and his whole crew. You had Kira and the Bajorans, and then you had Starfleet. And all three of them coming together and finally functioning as a cohesive unit was incredible.
One thing I wanted to talk, and this is kind of off, but I still think this is, it's not something that we see in a single episode, is his relationship with Nog, and how he kind of has to confront his own biases when it comes to the Ferengi. From the very beginning,
Right.
you can see even, he even says, basically tells Jake, I don't want you hanging out with him.
Yeah.
And he has to very quickly, realize like, oh wait, I have, definitely have, and that's we see that throughout Star Trek, how there are certain race, they're Starfleet's supposed to be so high-minded and all this stuff, but yet one of the first things you see when the Ferengi, first kind of show up in Next Generation, Riker basically says, I don't want them next to me.
Yeah.
He basically says, like, I don't want their kind next to my quarters. Like, that's kind of racist a little bit.
Racist, xenophobic. Yeah. I mean, it's, and this series finally, broke Ferengi out of the monoculture trap too. This series gave so much material and so much depth to Ferengi, and it's so much about it's about profit, and that capitalism kind of drives their entire society, but they're still individuals, right? They're still complex. And that's what Star Trek has always been about, right? Is finding the humanity in even the alien races.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I like, Mark, how you brought up the whole idea of the pitch, right? Yeah, and how 1,000 different things can occur with every single pitch. That's something that Sisko used in the Emissary to explain linear time to the prophets, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a constant metaphor.
Yeah, and it's I just thought that was, and of all the sports, baseball was the one that was kind of used because it is so much a thinking man's sport. People may call it boring, but I love it. But that's beyond. That's neither here nor there.
Baseball is very misunderstood as a sport, I think.
I do too.
We don't get the complexity.
No. And I always tell, like, what my wife used to always say, not to get off the topic, like, she was like, oh, baseball is boring. I go, watch it live.
Yes.
Watch it live. And I told her, because when we first started, going to games, I said, get a program and follow the program. Do the, follow, like, okay, this is an E3 air, single. That will, kick your brain in. You'll actually watch the game and understand, the complexity of the game and how everything works. And that did help her. She says that she prefers watching baseball live than she does, on TV, which I actually prefer listening to on the radio. I love listening. I love listening to it on the radio, listening to the announcers and stuff like that. But again, this isn't a baseball podcast. I could do that too.
All right, I know you have to leave us here, Mark.
Yes, unfortunately, I got to go pick up my wife here. She just texted me, says, I'm ready when you are. I'm like, okay.
All right. I know Chris and I have an episode each to go over, but we'll do that without you. Before you drop out, give the listeners just a little tease of some of your other projects that you have going on.
Well, of course, we have our main show, me and Garrett K. Jones, War of the Stars, a Star Wars podcast. Right here on GNN, currently we are going through our review of the Ahsoka series. We just dropped our episode 5 review, and we will be doing the episode 6 here pretty soon. And we also have our other show with me and my daughter, Star Wars Through the Eyes of a Child. It is our YouTube show. War of the Stars is our audio podcast. War of the Stars is our Star Wars Through the Eyes of a Child is our YouTube show. And in it, myself and my daughter, Lily or Cecily, as she wants to be called now. She's just turned 9, and she suddenly decided that she wants to go by her full name, Cecily, instead of just Lily.
Hmm.
Yeah, she's at that age now.
She knows what she wants, right?
We are watching the Clone Wars in chronological order. In fact, we just recorded our latest episode and plan on having it up in the next few days on the GNN YouTube show and the War of the Stars YouTube channel.
Very nice.
So check those out. There's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun doing getting my fandom with my daughter like that. That's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's great that you guys have the opportunity to share that with one another, and yeah, it's always fun seeing Star Wars, from the perspective of the age group that it was written for, right?
Yes, definitely. Other than that, that's about it. We got our all social media. We are pretty much under just look for War of the Stars. Our Twitter or X, whatever it's called now. My Garrett calls it Twix.
Yeah. Okay. I like it.
Yeah. Then we're at War of the Stars 1. That's also our email, warofthestars1@gmail.com. That's about it. So yeah.
Very nice.
Check out the shows.
Yeah. I just gave you a subscribe.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll check that out.
Definitely.
Nice. Well, thanks again for joining us, Mark. I
Thank you
appreciate
so much.
you coming on. Yeah, yet again.
Anytime. Just let me know when you're doing that Ducat episode.
We'll do. I think it might be a little while till we get to that, because I do want to actually do this captain series, and do the other captains that we haven't had, that we haven't talked about. So maybe we'll do a villain series then after that.
Nice.
Who knows?
That'd be a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thanks again for joining us. War of the Stars and Star Wars Through the Eyes of a Child. Go check out both of those shows with GNN. Mark, we'll catch you next time.
Take care, sir.
Live long and prosper.
You too.
Yes, sir. All right. Good night. Okay, Chris, let's pick back up, and you have one more episode to talk about, right?
Yes. And now it's not one specific episode. It's actually 3 episodes, all kind of in one little, like, 3-parter. So
okay.
It was the second season premiere of Deep Space Nine. It started with the Homecoming, then the Circle, and ended with the Siege. This was a year after the Federation takes over Deep Space Nine, and basically the provisional government is starting to fall apart on Bajor. And there's a group that forms on Bajor to try to get rid of it. Basically, they're for Bajor for the Bajorans, is what their slogan was. It was called the Circle. And what they didn't realize was they were actually being supplied with weapons by the Cardassians, who they absolutely despised. And so for the course of a couple episodes there, we find out that there's a Bajoran war hero named Lee Nallis who is rescued and brought back to Deep Space Nine. And basically Kira is removed from her role as first officer. He's put in. But in the process, we find out that Kai Wynn and one of the provisional government ministers, Minister Jaro, they're all working in collaboration with the Circle. And so they have to bring this evidence to basically the provisional government to prove that the Cardassians are involved. And what happens is at one point, the Bajorans decide they want everybody off of Deep Space Nine, and they have like 72 hours or whatever to get off the station. And Sisko and some of the Starfleet crew decide, no, we're not leaving. So they evacuate the station, but they stay behind to fight the members of the Circle who are fighting against the provisional government. And that was pretty much what the episode, the 3-parter, was all about. What I really liked about it is it showed the kind of growth with Sisko in terms of his relationship with the Bajorans. During the first season of Deep Space Nine, there were Bajoran episodes, but not a whole lot about Sisko's relationship with the Bajoran people. And this was really the first episode where we started to get to see how he feels about the Bajorans. He says to Dax in the season premiere, he says, I'm starting to see everything that we've worked for this past year start to unravel. So you can start to see that he's starting to really care about the Bajoran people and what happens to them. Not even just about the spirituality, but just the planet and the people themselves. Yeah. And that continues to go on, because at one point, I think Jake was going to date a Bajoran girl, and her father wouldn't allow her because Jake wasn't Bajoran. And so he kind of had like some racism actually going on as a result of this. And Ben even says to Jake when he's comforting him, I'm sorry that you had to go through something like this, and so we got, again, and just the fact that he decided to stay on the station so that they could actually get the evidence to the Bajoran government that the Cardassians were involved in this whole thing so that things could go back to normal and the government can start to run normally again. It was just for me, it was just a nice way to see his progression from the pilot where he didn't even want to be there to help with Deep Space Nine or work with the Bajoran people. Now you're starting to see where it's going to go the rest of the series, where he genuinely becomes an important part of these people, and what he's willing to do to help these people. Yeah.
He believes, he went from a man who, like you said, did not want to who had really considered giving up his Starfleet commission and resigning, to raise Jake. And he gets this assignment on, what he figures is going to be just, a backwater, society. He's kind of being put on the frontier, to be forgotten about. But yet that's precisely where his destiny lies, is on Deep Space Nine near Bajor and being so important to those people. By that point he had essentially fully committed to his role and everything, the expectations of a father, the expectations of a commander, and the expectations of a religious figure.
Yes.
I mean, he's always been a man who walks, in three different worlds.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Reluctantly or not,
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's a fantastic pick. Like you said, you got to see his acceptance of his role to the Bajorans. You got to see him be the father and be there for his son. And you got to see every aspect of Sisko that makes us love him so much.
Yes. It was for the first time we were actually able to see him pushing the boundaries of being a Starfleet officer. He didn't do that in the first season, but as soon as the second season started and he started to see the stakes that were and everything that they tried to do in the last year falling apart, that's when you finally saw the Sisko to the point where he's like, okay, I'm willing to break the rules, or I'm willing to sacrifice myself for something just for the greater good.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic pick. I'm going to wrap us up with one of my absolute favorite two-part stories in Star Trek, and that's Past Tense. And I know I had let you know that I was going to tackle this episode. I love it. I think it really, it establishes how much Sisko was in love with the 20th century. I mean, that's, you figure that's when baseball was in its prime, and you see that it wasn't just baseball that Sisko had an obsession with the 20th century for, and it was also, culture and the things that led, the catalyst that led to Starfleet being created was, was the sanctuary districts in 2024. So just if you don't remember the episode, those of you that are listening, a transporter accident sends Sisko, Dax, and Bashir to 2024 San Francisco in the days leading up to the Bell riots. And those riots were the catalyst for what, started to get Earth to start thinking of protecting its people. And you see, the framework of Starfleet is essentially built out of the ashes of the Bell riots. And as with any Star Trek time travel episode, ultimately, despite best efforts, they ended up embroiled in the events that are going on, and because Sisko gets involved in a fight in the Sanctuary District, his actions get Gabriel Bell killed, and of course, Bell is who the Bell riots are named for. He becomes a martyr, a symbol for the people to rally around, and without missing a beat, Sisko, jumps in and takes Bell's place without missing a beat to ensure that he undoes the damage that he caused and ensures that he has a future to go back to.
Absolutely.
It's just such a fantastic episode. It's, he always, Sisko always showed that he had a sympathetic heart for social inequalities.
Mhm.
He was always one to stand up for those who are unable to stand up for themselves, right?
Yes.
It's just a very, very heartwarming episode, and it shows you that that Sisko will go to any lengths to right any wrongs that he sees.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you on that 100%. I also love how the episode kind of got mentioned in the second season of Picard, where they actually do go to 2024 and we see some of the sanctuary districts. There are even little signs that you can see where that was brought up. And, one thing Star Trek always seemed to do was kind of predict the future in its own way, especially when it comes to technology. So
Sure.
who would have thought 30 years ago, it was the end of 94 or early 95 when this two-parter aired, 30 years before. And we have sanctuary cities nowadays. And it's just unbelievable that they actually predicted that all those years ago. And by the way, if you watch the episode, the date that Sisko and Bashir showed up was August 30th, 2024. We're less than a year away from that event.
I know.
Isn't that weird?
And I wasn't sure when you mentioned, 30 years and Star Trek predicting the future. I had no idea where you were going with that.
Mm-hmm.
I thought you might actually mention George Floyd, which, of course, that kicked off an entire movement of social awareness and picking apart social inequalities.
Mm-hmm.
And sadly, when in 1993, the Deep Space Nine writers' room was probably seeing the LA race riots, and that was their inspiration for writing about the Bell riots.
Yes.
Yet over 20 years later, humanity is still, committing the same ills that it did in the 1990s, in the 2020s, unfortunately.
Yes, you're right. I mean, I never thought about the George Floyd connection. That's really interesting. You brought that up.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
And the timeline almost matches up.
Yes.
I know we were talking the last episode about timelines in Star Trek, and us being in the 2020s when all of these events are supposed to start happening to ensure the Trek timeline. They're happening in different orders, different times, I don't know. I don't think we're any closer to creating Starfleet now, but
no, or Warp Drive. That's only 4 years away.
I think we've got a lot more things to solve first.
Absolutely.
But hey, you never know. You never know.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm not the first person to have picked up on that by a long shot, as far as the connections to George Floyd. I mean, I was just, I thought about that while watching the episode, and of course took to Google, and I found 6, 7, 8 articles just on the first page of Google exploring that connection between Trek and George Floyd. And obviously, we're not trying to turn into political show here, but Star Trek has always been about calling out social inequality and social ills, and trying to get us to think differently and be more open and kind to our fellow man. And unfortunately, we haven't been beat over the head enough with this message as a human race.
Right, exactly.
So take that how you will, but it's. I assume if you're a fan of the show, you at least understand what Trek has been trying to teach us for all these years, right? I would hope that our listeners are savvy that way.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Any final thoughts, Chris, on Sisko and why? I don't know if I know he's probably not your favorite captain in Star Trek, but any final thoughts to why he deserves to be recognized among the top captains?
Just the fact that he's such a flawed character, and you see he didn't embrace that at first, but finally he did embrace it, and he grew from the traumas that he has been through. I loved Sisko growing up. When Deep Space Nine was on, I was in 6th grade, and it ended 2 weeks or a week before I graduated from high school. So I got to watch him change from who he was in Emissary all the way to What You Leave Behind. And it was just, I've always respected him because he was not afraid to express his thoughts or feelings. He valued his crew. He valued the larger picture of everybody in the Bajoran system as a protector of them, but also as a protector of basically the entire Alpha Quadrant by defending the wormhole from the Dominion. He was just a very strong kind of character that you wouldn't have, in a different way than you would have seen, like we talked about earlier with Kirk and Picard, the way they would have handled things. They wouldn't have fit on Deep Space Nine. There's just no way they would have. This is just a little bit of a joke, but my honorable mention for Sisko is the first season episode Q-less, for one reason. He's the only human being that's ever punched out Q.
You hit me. Picard never hit me.
I'm not Picard.
Thank you for completing the line.
Did you forget the line?
No. I didn't forget the line. I was just hoping you would answer with the response. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. And it's funny that that you mentioned that as an honorable mention. Leading up to us recording this episode, I had asked for some feedback from some folks that are fans of GNN to find out what they loved about Picard. And I cannot remember the person's name, but there was a person who, his response to the question in the post was, you hit me. Picard never hit me. Mm-hmm. And, naturally my response was, I'm not Picard, but I cannot remember his name, but thank you for that. and Chris, it comes back around. Yeah,
exactly.
Our fans, I guess, fans of Sisko also like that moment as much as we do.
Yeah, it's amazing just that one little scene, how much that's popular with Trek fans.
Right. So we didn't get a whole lot of comments, but I do want to highlight the couple that we did get. So to Joseph Madden, he loved how Sisko could scare the crap out of you without even raising his voice. Mm-hmm. All he had to do was inject that Sisko growl into a conversation and you were ready to piss yourself.
That is a good comment that he made, because I don't know if you remember, but one of the first episodes with Ezri Dax, when she was talking to Sisko, she told Sisko that he intimidates Worf. The only person who ever intimidated Worf, not even Picard did, but Sisko does.
That's impressive. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And then we had another comment from Brian Downs. He had this to say: Sisko is the only captain of the TNG era that the Borg never bothered. It was almost as if Q warned them about him.
Mm-hmm.
Benjamin also walked the fine line between being a Starfleet CEO and the central religious figure of Bajor, and succeeded more often than not. He's also the only TNG era captain to conquer an extinction level threat in the Dominion with the use of time travel, or by being forced to be part of the other side.
Very interesting. That's an interesting point.
I think he meant to say without. The use of time travel.
Okay.
Or being forced to be part of the other side.
Right.
I think that makes more sense.
Yeah, I'm wondering if he's talking about how Sisko was able to convince the prophets to eliminate the Dominion fleet in the wormhole. Is that part maybe what he's talking about?
So as far as time travel, the only way that Janeway was able to eliminate an extinction level threat in the Borg was by using time travel.
Ah, that's right. Okay.
And then Picard not being, he was only able to beat the Borg by being forced to be part of the other side.
Okay.
I think that, so I think that's what he was saying, is that Sisko didn't rely on gimmicks, for lack of a better word, to eliminate the Dominion, to eliminate the threat.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So Brian, thank you. And Joseph, thank you for commenting. We appreciate it. Oh, Brian also wanted to let us know that his favorite episodes, the first 6 of season 6, plus In the Pale Moonlight, Emissary, and Way of the Warrior.
Nice. Good selections.
Yeah, I know we picked 2 of those at least. I'm not sure if any of the other episodes were in that first 6 block of season 6. Mm-hmm. And then none of us picked Way of the Warrior, but yeah, that's another phenomenal episode and easily could have made any of our lists.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. I think that's going to do it for us for this episode of Captain's Logs and Lightsabers podcast. You guys heard earlier about Mark's shows. Chris, why don't you tell us about your projects?
Oh, so like I've said before, I just have a small little YouTube channel that I do called Pittsburgh's Trek Chat, where I talk about different facets of the Star Trek universe, different episodes, different topics. I try to get episodes out as much as I can. It's just working in private practice, it's hard to get episodes out, but I still, in the meantime, I'm planning different things that I want to talk about that are going to be kind of fun. So you can just go on YouTube, type in Pittsburgh's Trek Chat, and it'll take you directly to my channel.
All right. As before, I really don't have any other projects that I work on aside from appearing on a couple other podcasts from time to time. So for now, find me here or connect with me on social media at Just a Disney Geek. That's pretty much my ID anywhere you look on social media. So find me, friend me. You'll get to see my exploits and such on there. But until the next episode of Captain's Logs and Lightsabers, may the Force be with you.
And live long and prosper.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.